Good morning and good afternoon and good evening, depending on where you are. Thank you for joining our By Growers for Growers webinar today, hosted by Montel and Heliospectra. My name is Marie Jordan. As National Sales Manager for Heliospectra here in Canada, I have the privilege of working with our growers and customers across the globe. Heliospectra was founded in 2006 in Sweden by plant scientists and biologists with one vision: to make crop production more intelligent and resource efficient. Today, with customers across 6 continents, Heliospectra is the global leader in innovative horticulture lighting, custom lighting control systems, and specialized services for greenhouses, vertical farms, and controlled plant growth environments. At Heliospectra, our mission is to redefine nature's potential through innovation, technology, and meaningful partnerships. Our commitment delivers operational excellence to our growers and their businesses. We appreciate our partnership with Montel, based out of Quebec, Canada. Montel and their worldwide network of distributors provide outstanding customer service and high-density vertical growing systems customized to your facility and growers' needs. Thank you for joining us today to share best practices and cannabis cultivation techniques. I would like to highlight a few housekeeping items before starting today's program. Please enter your questions or comments into the questions panel. We have allocated 20 minutes at the end of this webinar to discuss your questions. If we do run out of time, one of our presenters will reach out to you directly by email. We have more webinars available on demand, so you may find more topics and upcoming events that may be of interest. A link will be provided in the follow-up email, along with the recorded version of today's webinar. Lastly, please follow us on social media as we continue the discussions from this webinar over there. And now, I would like to introduce you to our moderator and growers today. Welcome to Dr. Ab Singh of FS Cannabis. Over to you, Ab.
Thanks, Marie. And yeah, so excited about this. I love these webinars. It's sort of like you're going to guarantee to learn something today. So I've set aside this hour, and I'm going to learn lots. Very excited. We have so many of these webinars, and there's a lot of webinars that come across around vertical growing, cultivation. It's becoming increasingly popular, not only in the cannabis space, but in horticulture in general. I find a lot of these webinars, they get you excited about the technology, but then you don't learn enough about how you actually operate in those. And so very excited about today's seminar or webinar, because we've got 2 amazing growers. So we're getting some real experience on the floor or in the air. And with that, I'd like to introduce William Fournier from Montel and Ryan Wonkel from Heliospectra. So William, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hello, thank you. Hello everyone, and I'm super glad to be here with you all today. So I recently joined Montel's team as their vertical growing system expert in regard to research and development too. A little bit more about my background. I studied plant production technologies. I used to work in the hydro shop when I was young. I then studied in landscape architecture, where I learned to do technical drawing. And just recently, I received a full LP license here in Quebec. So I just got my cultivation license. On my farm. I have a nice little farm, outdoor field, so a very nice project there in the near future. And just before that, I used to be the master grower for a big LP in Quebec, which is called Vert Elite. And yeah, so I'm pretty much all in the cannabis space right now.
And congratulations on getting your LP license.
Thank you very much.
Over to you, Ryan. Can you mind sharing some words about yourself?
Not a problem. Hello, hola, hey, aloha, bonjour, everybody. My name is Ryan Wonkel. I am a cannabis grower liaison for Heliospectra. Marie have already given you a little background of Heliospectra being an LED lighting solutions provider. I'm a second generation cannabis grower who ran multiple grow facilities here in Denver, Colorado, in the Colorado region, Denver and Boulder area. During that time, I've been fortunate enough to work with great teams and accumulated multiple High Times Cannabis Cup awards, and also transitioning multiple facilities from HPS to LED. Super excited to be able to always work with Av and William as well. So let's get this going. We're going to have a lot of good information pouring in. So thanks for joining us.
Sounds great. Yeah, that's exciting. And I just want to encourage you to keep asking questions. A lot of the questions I'm actually going to ask today have already come in advance from other growers. So please, I think there is a question tab there. Just keep sending those questions. Marie and the rest of the Helio team will look through those, and we'll put some time at the end to address those. So jumping right in, I know we want to talk cultivation. I definitely want to talk cultivation, but maybe we start with a little bit of the why and the background story of why someone might choose to use a vertical growing system. So William, do you want to share a little bit about when is this the best approach to jump into using a Montel system?
Yes, okay. I think it's all about optimizing your floor space. So that means multiplying your grow space so you can maximize your canopy and the volume of your room. For sure, the strategy is best used when your vertical growing system is on model carriage, so you don't compromise your workflow efficiency. Yeah, that's basically the concept.
Okay, great.
Yeah, and you know, from in Denver, or you know, in particular areas of regulations, you know, finding actual allowance of being spot cultivation areas to be able to grow. So that's like physical building footprints, and in a sense that a lot of the times it's actually hard to find those real estate areas to be able to grow. So really the only way you can, or people start to look at vertical, is just maximizing already what building footprint and already, you know, license that they already have, because the more buildings that you have, the more licenses that you have to go through. That can also entice somebody, I think, to a vertical grow as well as you know, real estate pricing and regulations on actually, you know, distance to cultivation spaces and so on.
Yeah, I think we see that all through the rural landscapes. There's often warehouses that are also vacant. Easier to maybe transform some of those than trying to get into some spaces which are restricting access via municipal regulations or anything. So you had mentioned some of the stuff in Colorado, Ryan, but I know that Heliospectra was integral in the Grove in Nevada, a great facility. Can you tell me a little bit about, you know, you were part of some of the design concepts around the Grove. What are the most important things to kind of think about when you're designing a facility that's going to have a tiered racking system?
No, I think you know, as I think Will can touch base and talk about as well, is that how important that planning and design stage is, from all your systems and mechanics all working together. For the Grove, in an instance, it was new that it was going to be that your HVAC system was going to be constantly overstrained, and especially into that tiered system, that that heat obviously rises, and you're also going to be battling a lot of those outdoor conditions where in Las Vegas it can be, you know, 120 degrees, 0% humidity for, you know, months on end. So for the Grove's consideration, it was making sure that in that racking system is making sure you're going to have that proper airflow, and it's easier said than actually the application and actually doing it. And you know, a lot of that consideration is knowing, okay, your ACE air conditioned units are going to be running fairly heavily, and how can you get that cold air distributed pretty much all over evenly throughout that space, and not having a lot of those really dense cold spots, which tend to then lead to powdery mildew situations, which is the worst, to be able to really starts to really complicate things in a vertical situation when you are looking at powdery mildew. So for them, the HVAC was heavily important, which took into consideration of their lighting design of choice. And for them, you know, not only for them looking into a spectral controlled option, they really were looking for an actively cooled situation, just to be able to allow that airflow to move. So they looked for an equipment that would be able to kind of assist them in their HVAC equipment instead of inhibiting them. So I think that your choice of equipment very early on, from, you know, your different lighting options to your height restrictions, which I think we'll definitely get into, all has to be taken into consideration. And also your safety, your flow, how you're going to access those shelves. Is it a scissor lift? Is it a, you know, is it a solid platform that you're actually going onto? So a lot of those are all have to be taken into consideration. But your cultivation, how it all is going to operate together, it's all very important.
And I know that both Helio and Montel do a lot of that design support, and it is probably easier to have that concept. Yes, I want to do a vertical system and do a straight build out. William, I know that you've just been involved in doing a transition where you took somebody's facility that had rolling benches, single tier rolling benches, and moved them into a tiered mobile.
Yes, correct. So just like Ryan said, when it's a new project, planning is everything. But when you have an existing building and facility that you want to retrofit, I'm gonna walk through the step we went to adapt a room that was already built. So okay, first of all, we had to make sure that all the actual production would fit in the room, and for this we used the room dimension, and we multiplied the level of the vertical growing system we had in mind. So and then we validated if we had enough height ceiling at first, and then the next step was to make the light plan. So with the light plan, we were able to make sure we had enough HVAC and electrical load. And then we had to tweak the air distribution in the existing HVAC system to avoid the cold and hot spot, just like Ryan said. And for this in particular, what we did is we added more fresh air intakes line on top of the room. So we had a very nice, even distribution. So that's what we did.
Sorry to interrupt, William. What was the height that you were?
We had the height of around 15 feet, if I recall. Yeah, 15. Yeah, this project was a bit particular because it was an actual grow room. So we needed to convert some grow room into flowering room. So we built like a super efficient 3-tier pre-veg and veg room to provide fully grown plants ready to flower in all the other flowering room of the facility. So it was a bit of a challenge. So that's why, like, the calculation to make sure we had enough batches in production in that small room was very important to validate if we had enough to provide plants for the whole facility. So it's a bit of an unusual project, but I mean, it worked perfectly. And because of the vertical growing system with the model carriage, it was like we were able to maximize everything, but to keep the workflow and the efficiency. So yeah, the next step we did is we put a lot of effort into the irrigation system and the drainage setup. So when you go on multi-level and multiple rows, you have to make sure that your fertigation system is not choking, if you want, your draining system, and you have enough capacity to water in sequence all of your room. So, and overall, the biggest challenge was definitely the air distribution system with the existing HVAC, and also to optimize the workflow to have multiple teams working at the same time without everyone stepping on each other's. So that was the biggest challenge.
I guess it's a follow-up question to both of you. In designs, whether they're straight build-outs or a retrofit, what are some of the biggest blunders you've seen that you really want to caution people? Remember not to do this.
Okay. Yes, that's a good question. Because of the optimization you can do with like the multi-level growing system, the danger is to try to optimize all your space. Like it's so easy to say, oh, we can put one more row because we have the room for it because it's on model carriage. Let's optimize it like at the maximum. But in reality, the higher you go and the more volume you have for the core of your growing system, the more space you need around in front and on the perimeter of your block of racking, if you want. So that's the real danger. It's to maximize, but to put yourself a limit to keep your ergonomy and efficiency for your team of workers, because it's so important, the ergonomic. I mean, when you harvest or when you sanitize your room, you want to have multiple small team working at the same time, like not everywhere in the room, but couple of rows. So because you're rushed to refill that room, every day's count. So I think that's the danger and the biggest challenge.
Yeah, I think that's really great advice. Is that how much should you optimize all that space? Because I think all those points are really, really great. And I see that, in the retrofit situation, that it is enticing that, especially going from a legacy lighting and using your HVAC for your legacy lighting situation, your flowering rooms, and it's enticing to, oh, if I switch to LED, I can kind of use my same HVAC because I'm now utilizing less BTUs for my LEDs. I can go 2 tiers. I can double everything and expect double the outcome. And I think that underestimation of all of that workflow, that more of the tiers, that it's not just, that you're adding an extra tier and you're going to automatically double your yield, that you should just estimated, double your medium, which of course that's going to be the case, but double your labor. It's going to be the more levels that you go up tends to add more labor than the previous levels before. So underestimating, your workflow, I think can be a very big flaw, and especially in a retrofit, that it is a different grow room from your standard one level legacy lighting to then go into a high density vertical growing situation where you're doing multiple tiers and LEDs. So understanding that there are differences from just the cultivation style that's going to happen.
Great, thanks. I think I was going to ask this question a little later, but maybe we can jump on it right now. I mean, some of the challenges that I've seen, we've gone into facilities that have thought that they were going to do a vertical racking system, but they've got corridors that are like 4 feet wide. What type of specialized equipment? You had mentioned, I think Ryan had mentioned, are you using scissor lifts or a hybrid lift or stairs, or I think William, you mentioned a platform. What are some other pieces of equipment that are going to reduce that the work, increase the workflow, reduce the amount of labor that's required, and perhaps address some of the challenges that, what if you only had 4-foot corridors?
Yes, that's a good question. In terms of spacing in front of your room, if you want, from your door to your first set of rackings, I always try to have at least 6 feet for me. If you don't have it, it's more challenging. Same thing for the doors. I always try to have large doors or double doors, so you can have two people going through that door with racking on wheels, and it's not becoming a choke point. That's very important. If you don't have this space, it's more challenging. I think in general, the higher you go with your levels, the most likely you will need an electrical lift for this. And there's some models that can be used in clean and humid environment. If you are from 2 to 3, maximum 4 level, depending on the space in between, a standard ladder on wheels with a small platform can work. But other than that, it's all about the racking on wheels that you bring into your environment and the toast that fits in it and the flow of your workers. So make sure they don't choke in the alley, and make sure they don't choke at the doors. Same thing goes for the corridor. In a huge facility, I would go at minimum 8 feet. In a small to medium, it's workable. It's 6 feet, but it's still tight. So I still recommend minimum 8 feet. And yeah, that's about it. What can we add more? Yes, your workers. You don't want your workers to step on each other. So make sure you have enough space to open at least 2 full rows at a time in your growing vertical system, so
Okay.
they can work from each side of the racking at the same time, and then they are way more efficient.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, that's something I have never considered. So that's great. Ryan, any comments on specialized equipment? What's the easiest way to bring plants into the room, get them on and get them off?
Yeah, at the Grove, they particularly had a couple scissor lifts that worked out very nice. I think that regulations that you're going to find that each of your different building codes, and whether, here in the U.S., we don't deal much with OSHA, but it's only a matter of time when things start to become, federally legal, that then you'll be dealing with a lot of OSHA standards. So of course, making sure that worker safety is probably the most important when it comes to, running a scissor lift and running up and down, and having that clear space, as Will has pointed out, and giving the workers a clear enough amount of room so they aren't on top of each other is key. Particularly that the early on stages of vertical grows, and at the Grove particularly, they would hire climbers. You want nimble workers. I think that's pretty important when you're working on that second level, that there is some safety concerns, and depending on chemovars of choice that you're putting on top, and how much work you're trying to minimize as much I'd say canopy or cultivation work on those top and higher levels as possible. That's, I think, obviously a goal for anybody. But sometimes regulations will require, whether it's a stationary mezzanine in between a 4 foot, where it's kind of a non-mobile or a high density racking situation. That could be, very important to obviously taken into consideration.
Do you either of you, do you see more effort being put onto the lower tiers than the higher tiers? Do you actually see a disproportionate amount of work being?
I was about to touch base exactly on this. We always think that it's more difficult to achieve work on the top tier in a system. But people tend to forget that the first one, it's kind of hard to work, because you always crawl and it's so low. So I know that we try to optimize every inches in height in the system, but your first level, if you can raise it, if you have the space, design it a little bit higher so you can put all your irrigation drainage line and not your drainage line, and everything is covered by your growing table if you want. So you have a neat, clean alley without anything in your way when you work. So, and if it's a bit higher, it's way more ergonomic. So you can have rolling low profile stool And like you have to consider things like knee pads and stuff like that for your workers because they get hurt for real at that type of height, you know.
So what do you
Yeah.
recommend? A bottom tier that starts like 8 inches off the ground or 4 inches? What do
I
you
think you can have at least 12 inches. You're start to talking when you're at that 6-8 inches. If you can go at the 16, do it at 16. To be honest.
Right.
Yeah. Again, I think that once you're looking to maximize space, you're always just trying to look to utilize every inch that you can for cultivation. And again, in a large commercial facility, if you're looking to continue to retain workers, high quality product, you know, worker ergonomics is super important. And I think that that's a really valid point that when you're looking for that facility to build up that second level, also reasons for that, you know, high density level of maximizing that lighting uniformity. You know,
Yeah, let's jump right into that. So now William's taking a foot off the ground for me. You know, you got maybe a 14, 15 foot ceiling. What type of lighting are you kind of recommending for a 2-tiered system?
I think just before I touch base on this, don't cut the corner on ergonomics and work with us, the expert team that we have like so many resources and expert in our team, Ryan, me, Montel, Heliospectra, that you optimize every inch with your racking and how you incorporate your lighting and your irrigation and your table. That's where you optimize everything. But don't cut corner on ergonomics to your workers.
Exactly. Great. Yeah, great.
Like the obvious choice is to go with LEDs, of course, when you're going vertical, because you try to multiply your growing space and you want your canopy to be as close as possible as the other level if you want. So of course, LED for me, it's for everything in general, it's all about flexibility. So make sure you have a LED system that you can dim, so you have more flexibility to do all your stage of your growth, or you can play with it with your different cultivars. And like the nerve of the war, I don't know if you can say that in English, but like the biggest challenge here in Canada, I don't know if it's like that still in the US, but it's the high level of THC. So if your flowers are not high enough in THC, you're just stuck with it. So it's very important to have good strain, but high level of cannabinoids. Unfortunately, it's like I don't really believe in this, but that's the way it is. So the beauty of LEDs is you have a high intensity, and you can also keep the high uniformity. So that way, you maximize your canopy on top. It's all about lighting the potency, so it's way easier with this kind of system to achieve consistency and higher cannabinoid level.
Well, let me throw that right back to Ryan then. Ryan, you had mentioned that the Grove had chosen to do active cooling and spectrum tuning lights. I believe they chose what's the equivalent of the Elixia model with Heliospectra. Can you talk about some passive cooling as well as that active cooling and what you would do in those situations where you have limited space?
Yeah, there's a lot of considerations, I think, when it comes to your lighting of choice into what systems and, you know, your vertical, how many levels that you're choosing. Obviously, you're going to be looking at ceiling height. There's going to be, you know, one of your largest limiting factors of how many levels that you can actually go. Cultivation style, that's going to be who, you know, what is your actual, you know, your facility lead, the actual cultivator, how are you going to grow? Are you going living soil?
Let's get specific on, we're going to do a 4-week veg. We're going to top twice in that 4 weeks, and then it's an 8-week flower.
Awesome.
Yeah, we'll talk genetics and chemovars a little bit later.
Okay, cool. Well, if we just want to, if we're talking general, and we're saying that this is the growers' practices, we're working with 15-foot ceilings. As you mentioned, the Grove was really looking for, you know, an actively cooled and a spectrum tunable situation. So that starts to limit your factors. And when you're looking at, of course, our products, you know, you would be looking at the Elixia version for spectrum controlled and actively cooled. for this particular application in a 15-foot and given, with worker ergonomics, I would be looking at more of a slimmer solution that you can keep, as Will has mentioned, a light that you keep closer to the canopy. For us, it would be obviously Mitra, which can keep closer down into the actual canopy and keep the plants actually closer. If we were looking about a foot off of the ground, I would probably keep it a 2-tier system. I think that if with 15-foot ceilings, you can squeeze in 3, but I think that again, you're looking at then how much space can you maximize, and with your ceiling height, depending on your irrigation, your HVAC, there's a lot of all these other things that you have to consider when it comes to just throwing a rack in and saying, how much space I'm going to fill it all with rack. But you have to take into consideration of all your HVAC, how you're going to irrigate. So I would stick roughly around a 2-tier system with sort of those restrictions, no more than 3 into that. And I would go with more of a passively cooled light, just because mostly you see the passively cooled lights typically tend to have a slimmer profile in design. And then of course, then I would be majorly looking at my airflow situation, whether it's fans, but very much looking to not create any of those microclimates within any of those canopies.
If you tried to squeeze in 3 tiers in 15 feet, are we talking maybe a shorter veg period and still the Mitra lights, and or is
yeah, Mitra comes in, obviously there's several different configurations. So growing styles, I think that if you were looking at, HPS growers will look very much into how the light's actually thrown and the photons are thrown into a cone pattern. So for a lot of them, if we go say 2 tiers, I will encourage them a lighting solution that will throw light similar to an HPS, so they can look at that canopy penetration, which will keep the light slightly higher off of the canopy. If we're going 3 tiers, I would look to do, for us, it would be a split Mitra design with a Heliospectra if we're focusing on flowering. That would allow you to get a lot closer to the actual canopy. I would lower your veg. I would go probably to more of a sea of green. I would stay away from chemovars that tend to stretch, from sativas or really finicky OGs. I would tend to stick with a handful of short indica dominant strains, obviously, that are going to finish in 56 days, which is important. So I would stick to probably around a 2-week veg, no top, and anywhere from, probably 49 plants and maybe a hydroponic situation to maybe a 36 in, a small soil, living soil situation.
William, do you have any comments on either the plant density and or
Yeah,
you talked a bit?
I think he covered most of it, Ryan. But yeah, just like you said, like the tighter you are in between your levels, the less flexibility you have. You can play with the plant density, and like the tighter you are, you have limitation on your growing system that you're gonna choose. So exactly, you cannot go with a super deep living soil bed if you are limited. It make you use rockwool cubes or a grow bag of cocoa or low profile plants container if you want. So.
And I think why it's important to mention is, when working with a partner like Montel, who has experts like Will, Heliospectra, who, has access to multiple experts, and of course all of us working with multiple grows, is finding those experts and asking those questions, I think, is super important in a vertical grow, because it is fairly still newer technology that we're adapting, but there's a lot of information that people have at their fingertips, and finding a partner working with somebody like Montel and Heliospectra can just set you leagues ahead and make the learning curve so much smoother.
And there's one important thing I'd like to talk. It's like for a new company or a business in our industry, like the most important thing is your end product and your cultivar and your niche market. So you have to base your whole production system on your goals first. So you don't do the way around, like trying to fit what's gonna grow in a complicated system. So you always have to keep focused on what's your goal and adapt the best way possible your system for what you want to do, not the opposite.
Great point. And I always do. Yeah, you do have a good family of experts who will help you adapt as you evolve, because you know this market is always changing. You know, being able to turn back to those experts to say, okay, here's how we'll make an evolution of for your adaptations and stuff. I do want to ask and I do encourage participants to continue to ask questions and send those in. But this was a question that was posed by one of the pre-registrants, and they talked a lot about what are some of the environmental changes that you may require. So looking at temperature, relative humidity, the vapor pressure differential, and perhaps supplementing CO2. What are some of those considerations that you have to take into account when growing in a tiered system?
Okay. Okay, I'll try to say something. Okay, I think that the higher you go, hold on. Can you start, Ryan, on this, please?
Oh yeah, I'm definitely happy to start. I mean, air movement's key, you know, but how that's going to be achieved, you know, is really important, and being flexible. Obviously, early on design and consideration, working closely with not only your racking partner like Montel or lighting with Heliospectra, but your HVAC partner as well, working very closely hand in hand. You know, when you talk about CO2, we know that CO2 is going to be heavier than oxygen, so it's going to obviously want to fall. Always creating that vortex effects, which can be, you know, a challenge, especially when you're going to, you know, 5 tiers and you're, you know, running, you know, 15 to 10 inches off of your canopy. The closer that your system is closer to your canopy, the more you're going to have to worry about those microclimates actually over that. Particularly, so reasons of particularly why some people will go with an actively cooled situation to work for. Air distribution is pretty much everything, and then being able to adapt and to change that, obviously getting your system running, and then once you start to actually do the cultivation processes, you know, controlling your VPD is I think one of the more difficult things. That obviously your heat rises, your CO2 drops, so taking all of those into consideration, making sure that you have the proper air movement, monitoring all of those you know, hot or cold spots, super important.
Yeah, so okay, I think just like I said before, when you go vertical, obviously you go with LEDs. So what is gonna change compares to a conventional HPS lighting system is, first of all, you're gonna need to run your temperature higher than with a conventional system. So right there, it's good if you want for your HVAC system, because they are way more efficient at 28 Celsius compared to 20, 21, 22 Celsius. So your HVAC sizing will be won't be the same. Yes, bigger because you have more electrical load in terms of lighting, but way more efficient. In regard to the VPD management, because the stretch of your canopy is so important, because you have limitation with your height, I would recommend to have a positive differential factor in the night. So you try to heat as much as the day during the night, so the vegetal cells grow more like rounded shaped than rectangle shaped. So you have a more stacked internals in your plants. So this is one tips that I could recommend.
So William, do you want to just explain that a little bit further, or just even repeat that, talking about the daytime, nighttime temperatures?
Yes, exactly. There's a way to limit the stretch of a plant when you play with the night temperature. We could go further further with the pre-day and pre-night settings, but just like the basic concept is when you have a day temperature equal to your night temperature, your plant tend to stretch a bit less. So this is something that I will explore for a grower that use a vertical system, and even the regular grower too. And it helps to have a better climate against the PM2, because you don't have this condensation shift between your night and your day period.
Yeah.
So this is something that growers should try. And in regard to monitoring your data, monitoring for your environment, a vertical growing system requires more sensors. So you want to be on top of the game and make sure you find and you understand perfectly where are your cold spot and your hot spot, and where you have to work to adapt your air distribution. So it means more sensors usually.
Right. Yeah, I completely agree. Application, goes a long way. I don't think I've walked into one vertical grow that has perfect conditions from one floor to the other. So minimizing those variabilities is the most important factor, and then finding the chemovars or strains that you find that works well with some of those variabilities, whether it's a slight temperature increase on the top and finding that cultivar that can handle that. And then, the positive diff and taking any of those considerations is super important factors when it comes to controlling that stretch and working with maybe some of those HVAC limitations.
Super. Maybe let's just jump right into a real scenario. Maybe Ryan, do you want to take us through what you would envision a harvest might look like? Let's say we've got a two-tiered operation. Take us through a harvest.
Yeah, I think that your regulations is going to dictate how you're, if here in Denver, we have to weigh all of our wet weight. Everything's 100% tracked. Very similar, with seed to sale tracking processes, I think, that are standard and adopted all across the board. Typically what we find, I think that when we've talked about chemovar and strain choice and placement a handful of times, and that's going to go into consideration about your harvesting times. We find that you got to have limiting risk factors for cross-contamination. If there's any sort of pathogens issue of powdery mildew, or even if you're using a living soil, for instance, I've worked with vertical grows in the past that they had Aspergillus niger being failing, particularly which can be released from your soil. So how they were actually stacking buckets on top of each other, harvesting and trying to get all of the soil out. Every time they would set that bucket, you'd see that little poof, because they would do a nice little drought stress at the end to, increase secondary metabolites. Their medium was very dry. And just that little bit of dust kicking up would then contaminate the product. So they would come back with a failed pathogen test when they would get it sent off to the lab. So typically what we would find and what we encourage is harvesting your early strains. Again, having that workflow of how much of those early cultivars they're harvesting at day 56. But typically we will suggest harvesting from the lower rack, from the front, to risk any cross-contamination from harvesting any top plant, then falling and cascading down onto the crop. So starting from the lower level and then working your way onto the top. And, not only when we're talking about, mitigating contamination and risk, it's another important factor when it comes to vertical grow is, the fertigation methods, and making sure if you do have any sort of leaking water or anything like that, that can also lead to failed pathogen testing. So taking all of that into consideration. But typically we'll have a team, just depending on how much needs to be harvested, of course, masking down, harvesting from the lower, weighing all of those individual plants, physically harvesting all of the plants before moving any of that medium out to limit any contamination risk.
Super. William, I believe you're still on mute. Yep.
I'm sorry. Very well said, Ryan. I would add that you need to turn off your air moving fans when you harvest. That's a technique that we did in the past because, just like you said, you generate dust particles. So you just stop your fans, so you have less particles movement into your room.
You can practice all of those similar best practices that you've implemented into your grow. Turning down the lights, obviously, when you're turning down those fans, you're going to need to turn down your lights to limit any sort of hot spots. You can still kind of do all of those practical elements and end of production stresses, whether it's 24 hours of darkness and cooled room temperature. It's still doing all of those in consideration. So that's a really good point there that you point out, and still keeping those best practices that you do at the end in your legacy or standard one-tier operations.
I see Marie has joined us. That's the magic signal that all these easy questions are finished. Now you get the tough ones. These are coming from our audience members. So take over, Marie.
Yeah, and we have had, tons of questions coming in. So we're just trying to curate and get them all to make sense in a logical order. And first question, vertical growing clearly works well in fully enclosed indoor grows, but do they work in glasshouse grows where natural light obviously is a big component?
Everything is possible, but if you go with a multi-tier, like horizontal multi-level growing system, for sure it's not appropriate because you have all your lighting that are like completely absorbed by your last level on top. But some growers are going vertical like that, so they have their canopy like in a vertical way, and this can be modeled too. And everything is possible. Everything is like Montel can customize all kind of racking on carriages, and I've seen some setup that are out of this world like that, and it can work. So.
Yeah, I think you're not seeing it too often, as well as pointed out. Anything is relatively possible. I think that once you start looking at the cost and HVAC, because when you are going to say a solid standard vertical system in a glass house, of course, you might have to look at supplemental lighting for the top, depending on your DLI and how much you're hitting, and then your whole lower level is going to be all sole source lighting. So then depending on your actual cost, then it kind of what's the way of possibly just going into an indoor situation. So lighting has to be consideration when you're going to a vertical level on a glass house. You do see a lot of food production, in Southeast Asia, where you see these pyramid type vertical situations, and they'll go more of a pyramid for a shorter crop. I think that could be appealing into the cannabis market, but you would have to look at lighting levels and consistency of product. But I think that it is all possible, but you do see pyramid type setups as well as the kind of horizontal or straight up and down walls as well.
Okay, fantastic. Next question. Specific to lighting and vertical cultivation, how do you deal with watts used per square foot? If the state that has a regulation of energy, in a state that has regulation of energy use, so they've given the example of Massachusetts having a max of 50 watts per tier, tier 1 and 2, but tier 3 to 7 has a limit of 36 watts per space, per square foot of canopy space. So how do you deal with the watts used per square foot?
Really great question, and I think that we're all navigating the lighting power density regulations that we're seeing, and I've myself have worked very closely with several external partners of ours with making suggestions to different regulatory branches when it comes to implementing a lot of these lighting power densities or watts per square footage regulations. For a lot of these, we see that there's going to be an adoption to canopy, that we're going to be looking at actually relative canopy to watts, which I think is really an important factor, because if we're just looking at pure square footage of actual 3D room space, I think that we'll see a lot of manipulation of the actual regulations, which are the regulations are I think going to be constantly changing and adapting to cultivators' needs. So I think that if we manage to cultivation area, I think that that's going to be our best approach, in continuing to work closely with the regulatory branches to educate them on the lighting power density regulations, because it's going to be we're going to be navigating that for a while as more states start to implement it, and we'll probably start to see it being adopted from a global perspective sooner than later. But I think that we still have a lot to learn, and how this is all going to be enforced. A lot of, Massachusetts is requiring, data collection, which these regulations will, I think, constantly adapt and change any of the early on processes. What we work with here in Colorado is a lot of the regulatory branches work very closely with the cultivators of really understanding the needs. But that is a very realistic thing that we'll all be facing as growers.
That's something that we are not facing right now here in Canada, probably in the near future. But maybe there's a way to check if it's possible to grow crop that need a bit less DLI intensity of lighting on top, and then but it sounds like it's a big challenge.
Okay. The next question is a William-specific question about the Montel products. So what is the minimum space where a Montel vertical system can be installed? Height, but also length and depth.
That's a very good technical question. I mean, in terms of height of your environment, there's not really a minimum, because we also do just a model carriage on one tier. So you can technically replace a standard rolling bench with these model carriage. And for me, it's such a nice solution that I never again will be designing a facility without these racking, because it makes so much sense to have these benches on railing instead of a fixed center to center. So you don't need a lot of height. I'm designing a room right now which has only 8 feet total, and with the HVAC system in the room, not outside of the ceiling, and it's way enough for one single tier system. And in terms of load and length, it really depends of how many level you will add and what's the length. But we have different models for different capacity. So we have the 8M roll model that can support much more weight on it, and we have 2 other models that are lighter if you want. So, but everything is custom.
Sorry, what type of weight are you referring to? How much can it per square foot hold?
I don't have the chart with me, but there's a nice load chart for all the models available, and we can adapt and choose the right model for it.
Yeah, I think that the easiest, obviously, which stage of growth, the easiest place to start is in veg process, and I think that was where you see most effectiveness of starting into that veg and maximizing your your footprint into that veg operation, because it's typically a little less hands-on work. Plants are kind of moving, so depending on what stage you're at will dictate of how many levels, what's your minimum height in those restrictions. But I think starting in the veg is the easiest place and probably the fastest place that you're going to really see the effectiveness of vertical growing. And then from a non-cultivation standpoint, which I know we wanted to focus, but looking into a vertical kind of racking high density into your drying rooms as well. I see that that's one spot that I think that obviously the Montel systems I think would be very effective into those areas and your drying areas for high density storage and drying.
Exactly. It's a very good question, and I'd like to have the contact so we can share the load chart with all the different models. So when we can answer all of this technical question, no problem.
Absolutely. We will make that connection. One more question, last question of the session, and it's a cool one. Can you use solar tubes with LEDs for these racking systems? The question, commenting that the saving the energy costs and increasing terpenes using the solar tube. So is that something that can be done?
I'm not sure I understand the question. A solar tube?
Yeah. Tube that allows light from outdoors to come in and disperse evenly over.
Yes, like a sun pit. Okay.
Yep.
Wow.
Yeah, the short answer definitely yes. Can definitely be integrated into that system, and especially within that top level. I think that you will, if you're going to a vertical situation and consistency of product, if you're talking increasing, because you are getting that spectral quality change from having that supplemental natural sunlight coming into the room, consistency of product, making sure that you can get a fairly even consistency of your chemical profile, or making sure that you're cultivating a certain variety on top and not mixing the strains, because you will probably find a variance in chemical profile if from the same chemovar from the top shelf to the bottom, with having that spectral change, working in combination with the LED. But it definitely can be done.
Yes, and I think we already see a lot of vertical growing setup where we have low profile passive cooling light on the first two tier, let's say, but the top tier has another kind of fixture on top in between the ceiling and the last tier. So I think this just like Ryan said, it's possible, and it would be a very, very unconventional but nice project. Curious to see if it's working well.
Yeah, I think that making sure that you have a proper lighting plan and, seeing what that natural DLI and working really closely, we have a great technical team with that can create a lighting plan and look at that natural DLI at Heliospectra. So working really closely with the lighting plan design very early on is going to be your most success, to try to get as equal of that light from the top level to the lower level as possible.
Before I throw it right back to you, Marie, I just did want to give a chance to thank Ryan and William. For me, the biggest take home, and I like how you emphasize the importance of ergonomics. To me, if you're going to produce good medicine, you really need to take care of your employees, and the emphasis that both you and Ryan put to that was fantastic. I appreciated that. Marie, back to you. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Av.
Thank you.
Okay, so we are closing in on the hour. We want to wrap up the Q&A. One of our panelists will follow up with you directly if we were not able to reach your question on air. We had lots of questions, which is great to see, but pushed for time and want to respect everyone. Everyone's busy these days. So for those of you who joined us late, my name is Marie Jordan. I look after Heliospectra in Canada. I would like to thank you on behalf of Heliospectra and Montel for attending this webinar. I also want to thank our speakers, Av, Ryan, and William, for sharing their valuable insights today. All of our attendees will receive an email with today's webinar recording and a link to download our new cannabis lighting ebook. Again, we appreciate your time and have a wonderful rest of the day. Hope to see you on the next webinar.